But let's get started on this discussion, facing my fear of emotion. So yesterday we covered quite a lot of information, didn't we? Three primary areas that we covered were faith, truth, and action, right? Yep. Faith, truth, and action. And now what we'd like to do is focus your attention on emotion. Like what's the role of emotion in this process? Now remember that these are, when we're talking about action and we're talking about emotion, both times we were referring to your fear with regard to those particular things. When we talked about faith and when we talked about truth, we were more focused on your resistance, right? Now, most resistance does come from fear, but it also comes from other emotions. So it comes from emotions like arrogance and a desire to hold on to your current lifestyle, your comfort, and a few other things like that. So whereas fear is quite specific sort of emotion, isn't it? Terror or fear, that's a bit more specific in terms of what's going on with your emotion and with your action. So if you think about your resistance to faith and truth, those resistances have many causes. But when it comes to emotion, for the majority of you, the primary feeling is fear of it. Wanting to resist it because you're just afraid of it. And you can see this fear in the whole world about emotion, can't you? If anybody's crying, it's like a major disaster if somebody's crying. And most people try... If it's a man, they generally laugh at him or ridicule him. If it's a woman, they try to pacify her and make her calm down, right? So either way, we've got problems with regard to the way in which we address emotion. And yet, love is an emotion. And as we've talked about many times with you, if you're shutting down emotion, you're not able to be as selective as you believe yourself to be able to be. Do you understand what I mean by that? Well, many of you believe that when it comes to emotion, you can be selective. You can choose to feel the happy emotions and at the same time choose to deny the sad, the shame, the guilt, the fear, and other emotions like that. You believe that you're able to be selective. And the irony is that God never made the soul that way. So as soon as you attempt to shut down one type of emotion, all other emotions are also suppressed to a degree or even completely. This is why many of you have experiences where you know you're not really connected to what's going on around you at different times. Because the reality is, for many of you, you're still trying to shut down a group of emotions while at the same time trying to experience life. And you believe that's possible. And in fact, you've been taught that's possible throughout your childhood, through your family of origin, through your school years. You've been taught that it's possible to selectively choose emotion. All right? And then to make matters worse, you also have gone into a lot of emotions of self-delusion. In other words, you think you feel a certain way, and then you choose to feel that way, and it's not even an emotion that you really feel at all. Right? And many of you feel that way with regard to some pure emotions like sincerity, honesty, and those kind of emotions. You often think you're sincere or think you're honest, when the reality is the feeling coming out of you is quite the opposite to that. All right? So there's a tendency to even attempt to fool yourself regarding emotions and to be self-delusional regarding emotions. And in fact, in my opinion, many of you are actually quite crazy, right? I mean psychotically crazy, but unfortunately that's the average way of most people on the planet, and so it's acceptable to do this kind of psychotically crazy thing of fabricating a whole heap of emotions in Façade while at the same time denying a whole heap of truthful emotions if you were honest with yourself that you would actually feel. And we're actually taught that this is normal. right? And then somebody who doesn't do that, they're crazy, right? And this is a big problem today. We've got so much judgment of emotion, so much terror of emotion. And it's literal terror for many of you, just terrified of it. Now, a lot of this terror comes from, again, childhood experiences where you had an emotion, and instead of being allowed to completely release that particular emotion, you were either threatened or bribed or punished out of the emotion. Right? And so this is what you now do yourself. You threaten, bribe, or punish yourself for having any emotion. So that causes a lot of judgment. Now, if we look at those primary ways of dealing with emotion, if we look at threats, what does that do? That's basically somebody threatens you. Well, if you have an emotion of some kind, you think of your child, you have an emotion of some kind. So quite often this happened when, as a child, you might have had a bit of a smack by parents, you start crying, and then you really get crying because not only do you hurt from the smack, but also you hurt from the fact that you were smacked oftentimes like with no reason or cause, and that hurts even more then. And so you have a tendency to ham up the emotion a bit. And what do the parents then do? They just say, look, if you're going to do that, I'm going to give you something to really cry about, or something like that, right? Which is a threat, another threat of potential violence. Also, I noticed that many of you live in threat. In other words, the reason why you're hooked into things like Facebook and these kind of social media type things, Twitter, Facebook and those kind of things, is because you're constantly analysing the threat. And you want a whole band of friends to help you mitigate any threat. So instead of just doing what you do in your daily life without needing to publicise it all the time, you need public approval in order to mitigate threats, right? You need public approval you need public to agree with you. You need your friends to agree with you. You need to have likes, and you need to have, approval of some kind. You need to share your life with the world to know that other people are interested in you. Right, rather than dealing with those groups of emotions which cause you to do those particular things. All right? So this is an indication that you're afraid of feeling anything, these kind of behaviours. Then usually what happens is parents also use bribery very much. And in fact, this has become one of the most common methods of controlling children now. Have you noticed that? Now it's sort of a bit looked down upon to give the child a smack. So what you do instead is you bribe them with something, right? Whether that be a toy, a lolly, some kind of sweetener, if you like, whether it be a real sweet or some other physical thing that they enjoy, and you bribe them into not feeling things. And so many of you are now not only doing that with children, or have done that with your children, but you also do that with yourself. You bribe yourself out of feeling things. You say, oh, I feel a bit low, I need a coffee. There's a bribe, right? Instead of just feeling low and feeling what it's about, you need some kind of injection of something to make the mood change. You feel alone, so what do? You've got to go out. You've got to go and do something rather than just feel lonely. These are, and you're so used to bribing yourself out of how you feel. Does that make sense? You really, it's a manipulation of your own emotion, right? To your own detriment, actually. But most of you believe it's not to your detriment. You also easily respond to the other thing, and that is blackmail. Now, blackmail comes from a bartering system. It's like, the normal bartering system is I give you something, you give me something in return. That's the bartering system, isn't it? Right? Now, blackmail comes from, if you don't give me the something in return, I'm not going to give you the thing I was going to give you. Right? Or I'm only going to give you something in return if you gave me something first. Right. And these kind of blackmail processes, many of you are so used to engaging that you actually think they're loving. Like when somebody doesn't give you something in return, you think, you know, they mustn't care about me. This particularly happens at Christmas time. Have you noticed that? Like any time there's a sort of expected gift-giving process, right? Birthdays, Christmas, those kind of times. This is where your expectations are really just engaging a bartering system rather than love. See, a person who truly loves you will probably want to give you gifts at any time rather than just at one time. And a person who truly cares about you also doesn't give you a gift so they can get something from you. But we're so used to living in that place, and it's a way of manipulating our own emotion. We do it to manipulate others' emotions and our own. All right, so this is the kind of things we do with ourselves. Yeah, with ourselves. It seems like strange, but we've been taught to do that in our childhood, and so now we do it. And whenever we feel or potentially may feel something bad, what we believe is bad, and remember our definition of bad is anything that might be slightly painful. As soon as we have that kind of feeling, we instantly engage a whole set of processes with ourselves in order to get us out of that particular process of feeling bad or pain. Now, the only problem with all that is that we've now become addicted to avoiding pain. And the only problem with that is that that leaves a whole heap of unfelt pain inside of your body, inside of your soul, in fact. And it has an effect both on your spirit and physical bodies. And then on top of that, it causes you to desire to engage addictions, which actually feed the problem more. You believe it makes the problem go away, but actually it feeds it more. And the more you engage the addiction, the sicker the soul becomes. And of course, the sicker the soul becomes, the sicker the body becomes. Right? And this is why many of us, as we get older, the older we get, the sicker we get. And the more problems we have. And then before we know it, we spend many now die after 10 years of difficulties with sickness and disease. Because this is what we're doing, engaging all of these processes in order to avoid our emotional condition. You see, if we released our emotions, we wouldn't have these particular issues. But we're not convinced about that. We don't have any faith in that, so we don't do it. And instead, we have faith in what we were taught from a child, and that is bribe yourself out of it, you know, pleasure yourself out of it, bribe yourself out of it, get out of it somehow. And this is what we do with our emotion. And why do we do all that? Because in the end, we're just addicted to avoiding the emotion. And I think it's pretty sad because the reality is when you're connected emotionally, that's when you know what's going on around you. That's when you can be happy. That's when you're actually aware. And also that's when you're actually logical. That's when you make good decisions. Right? And in fact, it's well known when you're playing sports that you've got to be what they call in the zone, right? Which is where the mind is. You've done so much work on technique and all of these other things that you don't need that anymore. And instead of being in your mind, you're now just in your feelings, and you just go by your feelings. And it's well known in the sporting arena that the feelings respond far faster to the decision-making process than the mind can. And that's why it's fascinating watching sport sometimes, isn't it? Because you see these people do some amazing things, and they do it so rapidly and quickly, they haven't even had time to think about what they're doing. And that's why, because they're being taught to actually connect through the feeling-based centres, and anybody who does that knows that that's a far more rapid way of making the best possible decision at that moment. And yet most of us don't do that in our daily life. Yeah, which is an issue.